Check 2. Hey 1.
Pedophilia and dementia aren't mutually exclusive.
Man, she's my Trump. I'm voting for her right now.
May 25th, 1787.
Hear ye, hear ye. The Constitutional Convention has convened.
Here is the Virginia plan for structuring the federal government.
Alrighty.
Here is the Pinckney plan.
You say pickle?
Here is the New Jersey plan.
Ew.
Here is the Hamilton plan.
Love your music.
Out of the way. Couple of big Southern boys coming through. Now, we can get started. It's nice you all think you have any kind of say here. If you want your union, this is what's gonna happen.
George Mason and the other Southern colonies used their economic power to garner all kinds of demands out of the Constitutional Convention, including maintaining protections for slavery and a promise from the Federalists of forthcoming amendments to the Constitution protecting the individual powers of the states. America stands at a crossroads with two very distinct choices. The anti-Federalists and Southern colonies steer us to the right, and the consequences still reverberate strongly today. Hello, everyone, and welcome to History is a Joke, a podcast where we deep dive into different stories from history. This week, I am joined by Monisa Brown and Abraham Tadesse, and they have not heard the story yet, so they will be asking questions along the way and helping me tell this tale to its fullest comedic effect. Today, we will be discussing the Second Amendment to the Constitution of the United States of America, the right to bear arms. Our story begins close to where the Fort Mose tale left off, in 18th century colonial America. As we learned in the Fort Mose episode, from day one of enslaved peoples landing in North America, there were revolts and rebellions against their colonial captors. You may be familiar with the term militia. Most likely, the modern-day context from news stories. More on that later. In the 18th century, a militia was a non-professional fighting force comprised of civilians local to the militia's region. The primary job of the militia in the 1700s was to conduct searches of the American enslaved population. The militias were looking for books, prohibited tools and wares, and most importantly, weapons. In the American South, every man was obligated to serve in their state's militia, ensuring a constant policing force sworn to protect the white colonial power structure. I should say every white man was obligated to serve. So these, I don't know how familiar or what the word militia or that conjures in your all brains. I'm from a rural community, and that has a, kind of a very distinct visual image for me. Historically, I feel like, at least for me, in history books, most of the images that you think of militia, you think of in the American Revolution and fighting against the British and that sort of thing. My dog is tooting and it's just wafting up, and just every now and again I'm getting blasts of just of some smells, some smells. As a transatlantic slave trade ballooned to such astronomical and horrific proportions, a great fear started brewing amongst the white American colonists. The fear of retribution. This panic was compounded by the Haitian Revolution, 1791 to 92. Led by Toussaint Louverture. French, it's the only French one. Toussaint Louverture. The enslaved Haitian population freed themselves and took a bloody vengeance upon their former French colonists, the French having received Haiti from the original colonizers, the Spanish. The result of the revolution was the world's first self-liberated nation-state free from slavery and run entirely by non-Europeans.
Woo, go Haiti.
And I also agree with that statement.
That's all I got.
And especially at the time that the European countries were dominating the world with colonies and putting them everywhere they could possibly put them. I think this was the only one, the first in the history of the world, and I think the only one.
Yeah.
Sad footnote, since we're talking about it, as with a lot of the other countries that won independence from France or Britain or, wherever, is they struggled economically because of they just they weren't able to sell any of their resources. They were all taken from them and sold. And, so Haiti still struggles financially, and France kept threatening to come back and get it unless they paid them money, as an alternate to the threat of coming back and reinvading.
Just a bunch of schoolyard bullies.
Lunch money stuff, literally. Yeah. Same thing of just pay up or I'm going to beat you up.
It's so sad what's happened to Haiti because it's an amazing place. I've always wanted to go to Port-au-Prince, but it's like it's always, unsafe for people to go. And, I know we're talking about the colonialism at this point right now, but just a special burden in hell to, I think his name was Papa Doc, who ran Haiti for a second. Him and his son wiped Haiti's funds as well. Haiti's always been trying to rebuild its wealth, but either it was a nation state or bullshit politicians in place that just destroyed the country continuously, which is why we see Haiti as it is right now. The prime minister was killed a year or two ago. There's still nothing happening when it comes to helping their people get back to where they were, which wasn't even in a great place, but it was still stable. Everything's since the 2014 earthquakes, it's just
right.
Hit after hit. We always we're dealing with our own shit as different people and different countries have got our own problems, but Haiti's been dealt some terrible fucking cards.
Oh yeah, but both from natural weather instances and from shitty neighbors and shitty people around them. Yeah.
But I'm really hopeful for Haiti because spoilers, at the end of Black Panther 2, the second Black Panther is there in Haiti. Hey, he's going to take care of his people.
The Haitian Revolution was the largest slave uprising since Spartacus, 1,900 years prior, shattering the white Europeans' worldview of the stability of slavery and the ill-conceived notions of white superiority. The fear of a Haitian-style revolution in America created a want for an unparalleled level of control over the American enslaved population. Enter the Second Amendment.
Hear ye, hear ye. We are here ye to celebrate the ratification of the Bill of Rights. This document contains the first 10 amendments to our great Constitution because we already are changing our minds.
Hurrah, hurrah,
Our
hurrah.
Bill of Rights is based on the British Bill of Rights, which is now over 100 years old. Why we can't stop copying the British, I don't know.
Oh, that's me. Now hear ye, the Southern boys are in session, and we do declare that we get to keep our militias and ensure the feds don't take away our guns. Now that is something to celebrate. Hurrah!
Yet again, the Southern colonies wield their economic power and the threat of mutiny, i.e. civil war, more on that later, and railroad the crafting of the Bill of Rights. The Southern demands, coupled with the news of the ongoing Haitian Revolution, led to the meticulous choice and placement of each word of the Second Amendment. So, let's look at that exact wording. The Second Amendment reads as follows. One of you want to read it?
All right, sure, I'll read it. Oh, okay, you go.
At the same time. No. At the same time.
A
well-regulated militia being necessary to the security.
Okay, how about one reads it?
A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed.
That's it. That's all there is. Now, many states ratified slightly different comma placements. However, the final words remained unchanged. Commas can be critical to correct interpretation, but the differentiation in comma placement is minor, and when viewed through the lens that the language is being crafted to preserve the state's right to their militias, the meaning is pretty clear. A well-regulated militia, meaning the states can keep their laws declaring mandatory militia service, because that was important to keeping the militias stocked. Otherwise, at certain times, culturally, enlistment might be down because people aren't fired up about it or whatever, and they don't feel like they would have enough people. Quote, being necessary to the security of a free state, end quote, meaning they need their militias to control the non-white American population. Quote, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The people, keyword, legally meaning white voting men at the time, that, like we the people. The people was a specific, choice. It didn't mean everybody. They would have said everybody.
Yeah, no women.
Well, that's a huge part of it too. Obviously no indigenous Americans, a white voting man was the legal definition of, the people. I think the people is a really commonly overlooked word that is very telling of what the intention of it was when people are trying to interpret it. And there's a lot of scholars thinking, what did people mean and all this kind of stuff.
Didn't the French have something like liberté, égalité, only white guys, or something?
That was exactly it, yeah. Quote, shall not be infringed. This granted the states total control over the weapons within their borders, as well as the command of said militia, creating a state-commanded counterforce to the amassing professional federal army. A fear that sat below that of armed people of color, but above, say, unnecessary taxation. When I was first diving into researching it, most of the stuff is just flooded with the reason that there was a Second Amendment was because the Founding Fathers were afraid of a British-style professional army in America run by a federal government that would just eventually become a British, style rule where it would be same difference kind of a thing. And so that is often put out there as that's the reason why they needed their guns and this whole crafting of, but as you look at the words and you look at who was there at these conventions, who was saying what, you can see where the initial because people would propose, this is what the Second Amendment shall say. And then someone says, I think it should say this. And and someone else says, and it kind of changes, everyone agrees on it. And then we eventually get these, the final product. And that's still what people say today. Why do you need a gun? Why do you need an assault rifle? Well, because the government's going to come and get me at some point and I got to be able to shoot and,
Big bad Biden.
Big bad Biden is going to trip on some stairs and crush you. Get out of his way when he's coming down those stairs. Oh, dear. The irony, of course, is that the real threat of armed violence came not from anyone but the white colonial population itself. One of the many great examples of this is the Whiskey Rebellion of 1791. As I'm sure folks are well aware, colonial Americans did not like taxes. We made a whole thing about it. The first U.S. government began in 1789, following the ratification of the Constitution. The preceding government was operating under war conditions and was essentially just a written agreement between the 13 British colonies. This preliminary U.S. government was unable to levy any taxes, and early Americans haven't. This meant the pre-Constitution government was borrowing vast amounts of money to pay for the war with British, beyond all the other daily expenses. Meanwhile, the state governments also amassed a large debt, about half that of the fledgling federal government's debt. Alexander Hamilton, the Secretary of Treasury, proposed the state and federal debts be combined, and the new federal government will take care of the bill. He sought to create national unity through a shared debt and financial system. Has anyone seen Hamilton?
Alexander Hamilton. I haven't seen it. I've listened to the soundtrack, but I haven't never seen it.
I've heard a couple of the bops.
I feel like they do go cover or reference, I feel like in some way, the Whiskey Rebellion and Hamilton's. I mean, it's all about Hamilton, obviously, in his life, and then him developing this banking system and the shared debt and that kind of thing. But I do think they mentioned the Whiskey Rebellion in some way. This meant, however, that the federal government needed to generate revenue to pay for the debts of the states and its own federal, what it borrowed during the Revolution. Alexander Hamilton, feeling the government had maxed out the amount of duties on imported spirits, which was America's main source of income.
Man, how do we make cash, man? It's like whiskey, bro. Like that's what they thought. That's what we had. That and slavery.
Imported spirits, which was Americans' main source of income, floated a tax on domestic distilled drinks. It did not go over well. The whiskey producers living on the western frontier, which was just Pennsylvania in the 18th century, went ballistic, literally. Distillers elsewhere in the Union also refused to comply with the tax, and by 1792, Hamilton was fed up and sent in the troops to collect his money.
Ooh.
The conflict turned into a years-long armed insurrection against the federal government. Even from the formation of the United States, this country has been plagued with violence from white extremists. The government in 1792 dealt with these violent white whiskey farmers the same way they deal with the insurrections of today, slowly and gently. The Washington and Hamilton government took almost 4 years to arrest the insurrectionists. This is, of course, a great contrast from the swift and brutal retaliation leveled against the black and indigenous people fighting for their freedoms in America.
Well, imagine if these guys had just chained themselves to their whiskey.
Fast forward to the greatest American insurrection of them all, the Civil War. All right, we got Mason again. Mason's just carrying this script here.
All right. LOL. My cat's like purring into the mic. She's being so silly. Okay. Hear ye. The ghost of George Mason and the southern colonies are back to wreck the entirety of American democracy. Now listen to my fellow Southerners. I warned you all of this day. The overreaching federal government has come to tell you, all your supposedly independent states, what to do and who you can and cannot own.
America's original sin had come to a head, and the struggle over slavery and freedom was one the southern states were ready to fight over. With the weapons and armies afforded to them by the Second Amendment, 11 American states seceded from the Union and carried out a deadly 4-year-long war against America and its people. The insurrection killed over 750,000 soldiers and an untold number of civilians, making it the deadliest conflict in American history. On May 26, 1865, the American Civil War officially ended, suddenly and with no true resolution. Everyone just stopped fighting one day and went back to what was left of their towns and homes, if anything. What remained was a bitter South, in many ways as angry today as they were the day the war ended. Abraham Lincoln's replacement, Andrew Johnson, pardoned former Confederates and looked the other way as free black Americans were terrorized by the southern white population. Ex-Confederates started getting elected to the state and federal level, to the point of former Confederates being poised to gain control of American democracy from the inside. Facing this threat, in 1866, only 1 year after the war, Section 3 of the 14th Amendment was created to specifically bar former Confederates from holding any kind of office or serving in the military. A great idea, until only several years later, in 1872, Section 3 was abandoned when every single former Confederate was pardoned, restoring all their previously revoked political rights. Isn't that crazy? It's not that, I guess not really, but it's also an interesting parallel because we're facing the same thing where a lot of people who were there on January 6th are running and getting elected to office. And people are saying, hey, wait a minute, should you be allowed in here? Didn't you try to forcefully overthrow the government? There is this talk about using Section 3 of the 14th Amendment against Donald Trump from becoming president.
Oh.
As we learned, it was, you'd have to twist it pretty hard because it was written for Confederates, but it was written for people who had attacked taken up arms against the government in attempts to, overthrow and start your own. You got a cat fart?
No, I think I inhaled some cat hair.
I thought you had a stinky cat fart.
Sorry, no. She's being so distracting. I'm so distracted right now. I'm sorry.
I just had to double check on this because something hit my memory after the Civil War that there was a record number of black elected office holders, especially in the South, right?
Yes.
Between, what was it, 1870 to 1900 a little bit.
Yes.
And then it all went to shit again. There was a moment.
And then all of these Confederates were pardoned and they got into office and they passed laws that prevented, people of color, black Americans specifically from...
Hey, I like your job. Wrong skin.
Mitch McConnell has been here since those days. We can't get rid of him.
Just an example of things, nothing's ever changes. We have this concept nowadays of what you call them crisis actors. That there's these conspiracy theories that, people who go on the news from school shootings and everything, you're making it up. You're a crisis. You've been hired by the government or by whatever big, big arm, gun control or whatever. Soros, yeah. It was usually some sort of a Jewish conspiracy theory or whatever.
Oh my god.
Some QAnon adjacent, blah, 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 blah. So that idea, that seems to be a modern thing, but right after the Civil War in Congress, they had former slaves come and give testimonials of what life was like, photographs, evidence, so people were supposed to be educated for those who were not looking or lived in a place too upper class, whatever, the rich white people in the cities and stuff were not looking, at what was going on in the South and where their, shirts came from and all that kind of stuff. They didn't care. So it was supposed to be an educational thing, and they cried crisis actor. In 1866, these people in Congress were saying, no, that's too horrific. You're making that up and lying because it couldn't possibly be that bad.
Yeah, my slaves high-fived me. Like we had high fives.
Right, yeah. Especially in the 20s and with, movies like Birth of a Nation and that sort of, and Gone with the Wind, where it becomes this, fantasized, and that becomes the line of like, it wasn't that bad. And part of it was because these testimonials were just ignored and considered to be a Christ, someone who was hired to come tell this. Yeah.
Cognitive dissonance of like a wrong for a people should be overwhelming, but it's amazing how much that is thrown to the side. And then it's just like, okay, yeah, sure, that bad shit happened. But like, we used to be really good with the South. Like we were home. Let's stop fighting. And what I really hate is when people use the word, I just want all sides to get along, which completely disregards the victim. Like we are all guilty of it, not to this crazy degree, but we are all guilty of saying the words, something along the lines of, I hate it when we fight. Like, I don't want our country to fight. It's so annoying. Let's just stop. Every politician is wrong. No, there's degrees to this bullshit, and there's people complicit. All right? There's people that are more wrong than others.
Yeah, and we should burn them all at the stake.
I'm open to a lot of things because we keep repeating the same shit.
Yeah.
We should probably do something.
Haitian Revolution.
As we're going through this, it just feels like we're talking about what's happening right now. Like, it just feels so present. It's infuriating.
However, the good thing is the amount of technology that we do have at our hands, I feel like it is helping us connect faster and quicker to, you know what? I'm not even believing what I'm saying right now.
To what?
Imagine if they had TikTok during slavery.
Do the abolitionist challenge. Be like, free a slave today. Be like, I freed a slave. Did you free a slave? Damn, you're a loser.
You get the trend to catch on that way. And yeah.
What's up, TikTok? Can't talk right now. I'm on the Underground Railroad right now. It's pretty fucking cold, but like, it's pretty chill. I'm with my girl, Harriet Tubman. She has a gun pointed to my head. Got to put it away. Bye, guys. See you in Labrador in Canada.
I feel like people would like lip sync to Frederick Douglass and then like dance. POV, your overseer is cute.
Monisa.
That was a good joke. I'm proud. I'm gonna stand by it.
Okay, here we are. So they passed this law to try to curtail, because they were saying, hey, all of these Confederates are just, as they did after January 6th, they're just running for office and doing it, quote unquote, the legitimate way. They passed this law, and then they did away with it because they just decided to, again, what was the phrase? Can't we just all get along or whatever, and pardon all the Confederates everywhere, lifting any kind of, because they weren't supposed to serve in the military for good reason. And that was lifted. So all these Confederates or, whatever could go back to the military. What followed was 100 years of repressive laws targeting Black and Indigenous Americans, with U.S. lawmakers desperately trying to maintain the white supremacist grip. From militias, slave patrols were formed. And from slave patrols came modern American policing. We pick up our story in 1967. Violent, racially motivated policing is rampant in America, and one civilian group emerges to stand up to the unchecked power of the police: the Black Panthers.
Woo, yay!
Founded the year prior in 1966, the Black Panther Party was a Marxist-Leninist Black Power political organization founded by the college students Bobby Seale and Huey P. Newton in Oakland, California. The initial primary function of the Black Panthers was to police the police. Armed, they would patrol the neighborhoods of Oakland and observe police interactions from legal viewing distance, document and report any illegal or abusive actions by the police, and if needed, intervene. The nature of the armed patrols was to provide a visual challenge to the power of the police, and a kinetic challenge, if necessary, to save the lives of those the police were supposed to be sworn to protect. Many fatal firefights occurred between the Panthers and the police. The Black Panthers obviously scared the hell out of white people everywhere and were, to white folks, the manifestation of their greatest fears. This is 100 years, almost to the year, after the end of the Civil War.
Oh, wow.
History is very close. These things are very close in people's memories and in collective memories. And stories, passed down, and anger passed down.
This isn't a joke, but one of my favorite things about the Black Panthers that I feel like that doesn't get highlighted enough is they started free lunch at schools for kids. And now we don't have free lunch anymore.
I always wondered, is that how police started in the U.S. was because of them being slave catchers? And yes, completely, because it horrified me. Because real talk, I always thought I've always wanted to help people. And I'm I would never join the cops because the historical connotations and, that power corrupts. America really fucked it up because in England, they had constables and shit. They had high sheriffs and shit like that. But then the U.S. took the same principles of what they had as police at the time. They bastardized it and be you know what? Let's just take the militia shit and what they do in England and really make it into our image for straight white men and really fuck people up.
Have you ever read The New Jim Crow?
No, I haven't read it yet.
It's a really good book. Highly recommend. It's about that exact thing.
I'm on it.
Yeah, the Civil War ends. And then on the end of the day, it was literally a thing where you just switched your name tag.
Yeah.
From slave catcher to police now was your job. And literally it was the same dudes because that they already had the guns and they had the horses and they had the wagons with bars on, they had the gear.
And now they've got bigger guns.
This shouldn't surprise me, but when I saw for a while, tell me if you guys remember this, where cops who were being filmed, they were playing...
Yes. Yep. Copywritten music.
Copywritten music, bro.
Wow. That's diabolical.
Gotta treat them like they're babies with guns. I mean, shit. You never know which fucking cop you're gonna deal with.
So in May 1967, the California Congress convenes to pass a bill making illegal the open carry of loaded firearms without a permit, curtailing something that was a cornerstone of the modern interpretation of the Second Amendment. If we think about open carry, we think that feels synonymous with the Second Amendment and the Founding Fathers, and I'm walking around with my musket, or I'm walking around with my 6-shooter on my hip in the Old West, or it feels like it's, but not for Californians in 1967.
I'll be rigging.
I knew you would.
Hear ye, hear ye. This assembly is now in session.
Let's pass this bill quick and get the wrong guns off the streets so the right guns can keep us safe.
Don't look now, boys, but I think they have us surrounded.
To protest this bill, titled the Mulford Act, Bobby Seale took 26 armed Black Panther members from Oakland to Sacramento. The group loaded their weapons and marched into the California state capitol and into the assembly, passing the then governor of California, Ronald Reagan, on the way in. Cameras were present and captured the dramatic display inside and outside of the Capitol. The images created a splash across the country, and the little-known Panther Party, with less than 100 members in 1967, quickly became a national name. Membership skyrocketed.
Just another recommendation. There's a really good PBS documentary about the Black Panthers, and it talks about all this. So highly recommend that.
Yeah, really interesting moment, and obviously a really courageous thing to do, ballsy thing to do, walking into the lion's den, essentially knowing that people could freak out to the, there could have been a shootout.
Couldn't be me, unfortunately. I'm not that strong.
I mean, especially at the time, the cops were so physically violent. They probably brought 26, guys who had been in some firefights in case something went down, had some experience. Yeah, it was also not stunt, but, action, both for the party, but also it was on the day that they were passing the bill, so it was unlikely that they would be able to stop it it was a demonstration. They wouldn't have been able to actually prevent it. The California state bill outlawing the open carry of loaded firearms, the Mulford Act, passed and was signed by Reagan on July 28, 1967. and joined a long list of laws specifically targeting Black Americans' ability to own and use firearms for self-protection. The Mulford Act was supported by Republicans and Democrats alike, as well as the National Rifle Association, or NRA. If you can imagine the freaking NRA supporting a gun restriction law.
Yep. You got to give a really good shout out for like the Black Panthers for at that time going in with weapons, knowing what could happen, making possible contingency plans of a shootout at the state capitol, defending themselves for having the right to carry and bear arms.
Which was legal. Absolutely legal at the time.
Completely legal. You talk about them going to the lion's den. It's one thing to go into the lion's den. It's another thing to know the lion's laws and to use the lion's laws against them.
Oh.
I don't know the numbers of it, but it is 1967. And at that point, I know that we have people who have come back from World War II. We have individuals that came back from, I think, Korea and Vietnam was at that time happening too. So we have a lot of individuals that are coming back with military training, with weapons training as well. So the restraint and grace that the Black Panthers had of being like, don't worry, we are good under pressure. We know where our fingers are on these weapons at all times. And if anything goes down, let it go down. This is the most American shit in the world.
Since the Whiskey Rebellion, to the Civil War, to the 16th Street Baptist Church, to Oklahoma City, to January 6th, white domestic terrorism has always been the number one threat to the American people and democracy. We saw a large spike in white supremacy and white domestic terrorism following American wars, from the Civil War to the Vietnam War. This also includes serial killers, who are almost always white men, where incidents increased greatly in the decades following the Civil and Vietnam Wars. Jack the Ripper and H.H. Holmes both existed in the decades following the Civil War. The Zodiac Killer is presumed to be a Vietnam War vet. Gary Ridgway, Randy Kraft, Dennis Rader, Jeffrey Dahmer, and David Berkowitz all had military service. Nathan Bedford Forrest, the founder of the KKK, was a former Confederate, and Timothy McVeigh, the perpetrator of the Oklahoma City bombing, was radicalized during his service in Gulf War I and on the militia training grounds of Michigan. Currently, militias are thriving and are comprised partly of former professional soldiers, something that was initially antithetic to the concept of the militia. These modern militias, like their predecessors, fall victim to racist and conspiratorial ideologies that in turn form the backbone of their mission statements. We saw these militias patrolling and killing in Kenosha, Wisconsin. We saw many of these militias coordinating with each other and operating as if a professional fighting force during the insurrection and attempted coup of January 6th, 2021. We always feel we're farther away from these events than we are, and obviously for future generations will look back and think, oh, you're so close to this. You're so close to the 60s, and, Mitch McConnell's still alive, for crying out loud. This stuff is not that old.
Yeah. Keep looking backwards. You see where we're at.
Yep.
I talk a little bit about white separatists, and that's kind of the subculture of white supremacy. And it's a more softer version of it. That's where a lot of these militias exist. I'm in rural Washington. There's pockets of different versions of white separatists. There's right wing. There's also left wing, white separatists that are super new age hippie dippies, but
we're Vikings. Ooh, look at us. It's like, bitch, just don't do that with your ruins. I love ruins. Ruins look cool. Don't ruin ruins for me.
Do you know they get their own weekend at the Renaissance Fair? That group of people. That's where we're at. I'm a Ren head.
What's your costume? What do you do?
Elf. I just started this year. This is my first year, but they have a whole weekend for like invaders from the north, being like, "Yeah, I'm a northern invader." Like how
We also cannot ignore the effect white supremacy has on the mass public shootings and school shootings in recent decades. Most of the mass shooters are white men, as are the perpetrators of school shootings. The two kids responsible for the Columbine shooting were white men with white supremacist ideologies, specifically killing at least one black student because of his race. The event itself being carried out on April 20th, Hitler's birthday, and the start of the American Revolution, a time of year popular with white supremacist and white separatist attacks.
I wish these guys would just go like fucking jerk off and watch anime and like leave the rest of us alone.
Well, that's what they're doing the other 23 hours out of the day. The FBI and other national security agencies are sounding the alarm at the rise of white supremacy and white domestic terrorism, flagging this as the primary threat to America. Greater than Russia, greater than China or Iran. The threat is white extremist Americans.
It's one thing to know about it. It's another thing to actually work on policies and procedures. Not only gets rid of these people, because they will still exist, how to counter and to end it. The best way to fight a fire is not just with water, but with making sure that it has nowhere else to go. You have to suffocate fire so it doesn't exist. You have to take the oxygen out of white supremacy.
Cut off their food source.
Chain them to a whiskey barrel.
If you poison the kid, man, they're going to be poisoned adults.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, oh my God, the education that kids get from their parents.
Ooh-wee.
And what their parents say and what their parents do is just, you're right, that's really where it is. And by the time you're in school, you're an old enough kid that you've been learning from your parents.
Yeah, you just repeat what they say. They're just like little birds.
You know, stuff from the Civil War can get passed because grandpa said this and he tells my dad and I tell this and I tell this kid.
A continuing narrative is reinforced by those you love and care about. Even though it's wrong, it still holds true to you. Yeah. Which is a scary type of poison to try to disinfect from somebody's soul.
The truth is unfortunately emotional. It's not facts or figures or graphs or numbers compared to other numbers. It's what does it feel to you to be true emotionally. You're right. You listen to your family because that's where your emotion is. If you have conflicting information that's presented later in life, you go to college, you go to school and they say, hey, grandpa wasn't so right about some of these things. You're going to feel that that's truer to you than some numbers in some book you just seen for the first time, pop up all your life. It's clear there were two intentions in the crafting of the Second Amendment. Hamilton and the Federalists intended the, quote, well-regulated militia to be regulated by the federal government, but trained and managed by the state governments, closer to how the National Guard functions. Mason and the Southern states shifted the subtle language of the Second Amendment to preserve their want of using the militias to control and police the non-white populations. In attempts to compromise, both parties chose to interpret the meaning in their own ways, and both were dead before the issue ballooned into the massive swollen sore on the face of America that it is today. In the horrific Supreme Court decision of the Dred Scott case of 1857, the court claimed that if African Americans were to be considered U.S. citizens, then they would have the right to keep and bear arms. So instead, the court ruled African Americans were not to be considered U.S. citizens. Many years of contradictory Supreme Court rulings on the Second Amendment prove the judges on the court have been raging idiots for years and years. In my opinion.
No, that's facts.
We have several recent Supreme Court rulings that guide the Second Amendment into the 21st century. District of Columbia versus Heller clarified the Second Amendment covers the right to personal protection via a firearm, not just when participating in a militia. It really hadn't ruled on whether this was strictly to be related to militias, which is kind of how it was written. But thanks Supreme Court, they said, no, everyone can have a gun no matter what you're doing. In McDonald versus City of Chicago, the court affirmed that carrying a firearm was a fundamental right to the system of ordered liberty, that's a quote, and should be protected as such, limiting the gun laws that can be passed by state and local governments. And in New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Buren, the Supreme Court ruled that the right to possess a firearm supersedes New York State's ability to issue concealed carry permits on a proof-of-need basis. These rulings, favorable to the Second Amendment, were all regarding restrictions placed on firearms. The ease of access and prevalence of guns and gun culture in America, coupled with our deep history of white supremacy, has led directly to the daily mass shootings we see all around us. And the oppressive legacy of the Second Amendment continues to this day. And maybe it is finally time to repeal the Second Amendment.
Ooh, mic drop.
In my opinion. You say repeal the Second Amendment and people just go fucking nuts.
Well, you're completely within your rights to say that you think the Second Amendment should be repealed.
There it is. There's the lawyer.
I brought it back.
Full circle. What's your all's experience with firearms?
I try to avoid them. I'm not a pro gun. I am pro glue gun. However, I think every household should have a glue gun. I have a weird job where I'm in people's homes sometimes. And one time this lady just had her gun out on the couch. And I was like, what are you, your dog could use that. Like, what are you doing? She lives in a sketchy neighborhood. So I was like, okay, whatever. But still, she was like, somebody was being weird last night. But I'm like, put your gun away this morning.
I'm fine with guns. I really like shooting guns. It's great. I used to work on a gun range as a range safety officer for a little bit of time.
Oh, really?
During the pandemic.
Being serious or are you bullshitting?
I'm serious. I told you this, Mo. You didn't know that?
No, part of me still doesn't believe you.
That is fair. But the thing is, when it comes to actually owning a gun, I won't own a gun until like when I own my own home, which will probably be never the way the economy is going. But like
Right.
in terms of protecting the Second Amendment more than protecting basic human rights of people, I think we have to set our priorities correctly, because when I hear of the people protecting the Second Amendment, all I hear is a selfishness there and kind of a deafness of, you know, protect this constitutional amendment, when in reality, like, we don't protect people's First Amendment rights in this country already. So what's the point of protecting this thing except like a selfishness to keep your toys and your idea of what this gun represents versus the actual necessity of the tool dependent on where you live. Yes, it's home protection. Yes, it is there for hunting. But really, the gun culture is what kind of permeates and kind of fucking people's minds up into what they put into the gun.
I think it's also another, like, really, I just feel like everything in this country is because of slavery. Like, not to make that big of a blanket statement, but like everything is because of like slavery, how we started. It's like, why everything goes back to that.
Goes back to how we handled it, goes back to how we ended the Civil War and the decisions we made to basically not touch anything. We didn't do anything. We just, like I said, it was just, war's over, everyone go home. And now we're in now times. And it's like it fucking ended yesterday, and for a lot of people in a lot of ways. And also, America had the choice to do away with it when they founded the country. And the southern colonies and their economic power, they gave in to the big corporations of the time.
I forgot who said it, but I think it was JFK. You know, you could do what is, or some motherfucker in power who was killed. He said, like, you can do what is easy or you can do what is right. Maybe Batman said that. I don't know.
That sounds right.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we did the easy thing. And that's our legacy. That's our country's legacy. It's very odd to say it's our legacy, but it is true.
Yeah. Well, that's it. This was a beefy one. You can reach out at historysajokepodcast@gmail.com. We are on Instagram at historysajokepod. You can find us online at lavenderfingerproductions.com. History's a Joke podcast is supported by listeners like you. Find us on Venmo at History's a Joke.
Like, that chicken.
Oh, Foghorn Leghorn, yeah. Uh-huh.